I put a lot of time into this talk. I always do. I spend a lot of time on a PowerPoint, and I write down a bunch of notes because I have like all this information. I want to make it concise, and then every time a microphone gets in front of my face, I'm like, fuck it, we'll just kind of see what happens. So today's kind of like that. But what I really want to do is I want to give you an image and an idea today of your nervous system as frequency. And just before I start, I'm curious if anybody finds that to be like a normal thing, that your nervous system is frequency. Right? Yeah, because it's pretty logical. We just don't happen to really talk about it in medicine that way, or about our bodies, or different things like that. So I'll just give you a really brief view of what I do and then explain why I do it. My work is called neural resonance therapy because of the resonance that runs through the nervous system. I was trained as a shiatsu therapist and an acupuncturist back in Toronto about 20 years ago. I'm a dual citizen, so I live a lot in California and I do a lot of traveling. And neural resonance therapy isn't really just so much a therapy, even though I was trained in shiatsu and acupuncture. It's really a way of kind of an accelerated anatomy. Sort of I feel like I have to slouch like this to talk, so. It's sort of an accelerated anatomy where we're combining Western and Eastern concepts. And that's not really done a whole lot. So yeah, this whole kind of weaving, it's really, what I do is I teach people who work with the body how to access the nervous system more directly to amplify whatever treatment they're doing. And so that's what we're gonna talk about today in a little bit more detail. But really this idea, I want to kind of whip through the PowerPoint as much as possible so we can get to more a bit more experiential and Q&A, and so I'm going to try to pace myself through this fairly quickly, because really getting the vision of yourself as the nervous system as frequency is what I really want to leave you with. And it's sort of trippy because we're talking about the nervous system like it's an it. And my nervous system is what's talking to your nervous system, talking about itself. And at some point, we have our subconsciousness, which is running everything, and then we have our consciousness, which is talking about itself like it's an it. And that's weird. So we have a nervous system that is in the body, and if it weren't for the electrical components going on, it's like the wiring in our bodies. And that wiring is what's running absolutely everything that's going on. We have a little sinoatrial node in the heart that emits an electrical impulse with this kind of, just like a crystal, when you put electricity through a crystal, it creates a very regular pulse so that you can tell time by it, and that's why we have quartz crystal watches. And your heart does the same thing. So there's this little node called a sinoatrial node, and it emits this electrical impulse from like offshore somewhere, we don't know from where, and it shows up in the heart, and that's what, on a physiological level, we say is the genesis of life in the human body. When I asked 20 years ago in physiology class, like, where it came from, because how could it be possibly considered the genesis of life if we don't even know where it comes from, I was told that when I had a better answer, I could come back and let the class know. End of discussion. So, you know, we don't view things unless they're actually here and quantifiable as being valid. After that electrical impulse goes over the bundle of His and Purkinje fibers and causes that contraction, your nervous system is running everything. And your nervous system, this it that I'm talking about itself, is the brain and the spinal cord, and it's fueling everything going on. And so just imagine for a moment that your brain and your spinal cord in your body is the thing that's living. And it needs to get food to nourish it to keep itself going, so it grows limbs in order to be able to go out and reach and touch and become aware of its environment. And it needs to move your organ systems around, and so it's grown legs in order to be able to walk this being of creation and neural impulse around. And then just take a moment and turn to somebody and look in their eyes for a minute. And consider the fact that it's this brain has made, this neural brain has created 8 layers of tissue in order to bore holes so it could see outside. So what you're looking at is the only external manifestation of your nervous system allowing itself to have the ability to see each other and actually connect with the exterior world. So this is your nervous system talking about itself, communicating with others, which is the same thing. And so it's quite a rabbit hole. So there's a whole bunch that I could talk about. Today's talk is about sex, Kundalini, and sacred geometry, and so I'm going to be whittling it down to that. If I had to choose one thing that I probably know best out of these three, I guess I would have to say sacred geometry, and that's extremely funny to me because math was the only class I learned how to fall asleep in high school, and the only class I subsequently failed. And therefore, the fact that I have anything at all having to do with numbers or geometry is like this massive cosmic joke to me, because I certainly was like, that was the last thing that I thought I was going to grow up and do. Sex, I've had. And that's, of course, just an ongoing lesson, as this room certainly knows. And Kundalini is really the reason that I'm here. It's the reason all of us are here. But it's the reason that I'm here because of an experience that I had 20 years ago. And I had a very powerful Kundalini experience. I didn't know what it was at the time. It was extremely violent. It was not, I did get an experience of bliss for an evening and a day at the end of a month of living terror. And not a lot of people talk about the hard, I mean, people will talk about the hard parts. I spent years not talking about this experience because it was too hard to even talk about. Because there's a certain thing that happens, I discovered, when we share experiences with each other. So if you tell me an experience, we know neurologically that my brain is going through a filing system, and it's looking for the file that understands your experience. And as soon as it finds the file, it puts your experience in that folder, closes it up, puts it back up on the shelf, and I feel good about you, you feel good about me, and we both feel safe in the world, and that's great. So if that doesn't happen, I'm still going to be looking for a file that's going to somewhat match your experience. And even if it doesn't match your experience, I might think it matches my experience because that makes me feel safer, so I'm going to stick it in that file and put it up on the shelf. If I can't find a file for you, I have a couple of options. I'm going to think that either you're like a bit of a drama queen or king, and maybe you're just exaggerating, or at worst, you're just delusional, and because that stuff just doesn't happen. And then the last point that I might come up to is like, I really think it's really beautiful that you have this experience that I have absolutely no concept of, and I just think that's fantastic. And that rarely happens, because we have a sense of really needing to understand what other people's experiences are. So I kept my mouth shut for a really long time about what happened because it was such a violent, such an intense, and such an out-of-the-box experience. And I think a lot of us would agree that this is really what's going on in relation to everything else that we call reality, because we don't know what reality is. So when we're talking about sex or Kundalini, or sacred geometry, we're talking about the other world. We're talking about this across the veil sort of idea when we're talking about sacred sexuality, right? Because there's the more terrestrial sex, and then there's very connected to the sacred sexuality, and the same with Kundalini, and the same with sacred geometry. So I say that because I want to encourage you to tell your stories, because I know from personal experience that there are a lot of reasons not to tell your stories. You get a lot of blank stares. My closest friends and family, in fact, have said to me over the years, you know, if it wasn't you, I would have thought that you were lying. I had very strong auditory and visual hallucinations. I had really what felt like 5 million volts of electricity go up my spine, to make a much longer story short. And I really barely avoided a psych ward. And the only way that I did was through a very bizarre series of events that kept me very safe. And I know that if I had been filled with a whole bunch of drugs and antipsychotics, when I couldn't even eat and I couldn't sleep, and I was constantly hearing voices in my head, and they were telling me to do really not good things, and I was getting so worn down from what I now understand is a huge amount of energy ripping through my nervous system that was scrambling my brain like a radio dial up on high, that I didn't even know if I was going to do what the voices were telling me to do. And so I was terrified. I was terrified for an entire month. At the end of that month, I finally, I think my nervous system just gave out because I couldn't support it anymore. And rather than killing someone or something, I had a remarkable experience of bliss and was filled with this very green phosphorescent color that I could literally see inside and out. It was one of the first nights I'd been out because a really good friend had dragged me out of concern and had vowed he would pour me into a cab and like just let me go home if I really couldn't be out, but he wanted me out. And all of a sudden I was bathed, I wasn't even planning on telling you this story, but I was bathed in this bright, bright green. And my heart chakra like just exploded open, and like a guitar string, people were responding to me like I was the most beautiful creature on the planet, which was just bewildering. And I had such an incredible state of bliss in my body. And actually 3 people came up to me that night and said, "You look so beautiful. You're just glowing." And I was laughing maniacally because I was literally glowing, and just none of it made any sense to me. So the bliss experience that I had for an evening and a day, I actually went home and I slept for the first night in a month. And I woke up and the bliss was still with me. And the only sentence that I could use to describe the download that I was getting was that I saw the greatest possibility of any given potential. Meaning that this idea of this birthright that we have as God or as the energy of creation is absolutely open to us and is our birthright. And my ego is far too developed to be able to maintain that level of power. And as a species, our egos are far too developed. And I knew that if this awareness and incredible insight and power stayed with me, I could see how messianic states come in, or that it's far too easy to manipulate and encourage people. And I recognized it was like a 5-year-old with a grenade in my hand. And so eventually the bliss left me, but it changed me forever. And it's the whole reason why I do the work that I do. So because I was trained as a shiatsu therapist and an acupuncture, I come from a family of people who have always worked with the body. I began to try to piece together what had happened. So all of my life's work is actually a healing journey, because really nothing mattered after that. I was grateful to be alive. And that was the hard part to explain to people, because people were like, "Oh, that's just an exaggeration. Your body's not going to do that." And it's like, no, really. And then in the Sanskrit texts, they say that it's a highly dangerous thing. You have to, be with a guru. You have to be trained. I think a lot of us are having experiences like this because as a species, we're evolving and going through a huge leap. So these experiences that are out of the box and the weird shit that happens is becoming more and more common, but it's not yet commonplace. And so I think it's important for us to share our stories, and I'm not going to go into any more detail around mine than that, but to encourage you to not only share whatever stories and weirdnesses come up for you, to also consider that there are things in your life that you might look at and think are normal that everyone sees, when in fact they don't. And your blue might be very different from my blue, and a whole bunch of different things. So just the observation of what your nervous system is actually seeing and transmitting and coming in can be very different from somebody else. And lastly, I also see that despite the fact that I understand the responses and reactions that people get when they share experiences, and I've felt the shutdown when people can't really contain the story that I'm telling, I find that there are certain words and stories that do that to me, because I don't know about you, but I am having definitely out-of-the-box conversations with people, and I don't have a file for it. And I'm like trying to find a file, and there's no file. And I'm watching myself kind of judge the people within that. So when people say things like, or write or discuss the fact that they're fully enlightened masters, my back goes up. I have a real attitude about the whole thing, because I'm thinking, so I live on the West Coast a lot, and I'm from the East Coast, so I have this very schizophrenic West Coast, East Coast thing going on. I can never figure out how I feel about anything. And so when people say things like that to me, and use all these words of this, kind of awakening process, the West Coaster in me is like, don't be so arrogant. Just listen to the story. Don't block what your experience is. They're going to start selling enlightenment at Starbucks soon, and you're just going to have to get over yourself. And then the East Coaster in me is like, what the fuck? How can you possibly be a fully enlightened master? Like Jesus Christ could come down and say, "I'm Jesus Christ," and I'd be like, can you walk on some water for me, or can you, put a universe in this glass? Can you do something? Because otherwise you're just someone telling me about an enlightening experience. So, and people talk about full Kundalini awakenings. I don't know what that is. I don't have a file for that either. All I know is that I went highly, highly psychotic. And that blew my mind to all of a sudden go from being this person to being somebody totally different, and then come back to my body. And what that did was it rewired my entire nervous system. So in that rewiring, my process seems to be in the healing of weaving together the Western and the Eastern sciences. And what happened was I began to feel what was happening in the body. I began to feel meridians. I began to feel some things that I'm going to be going over today. And then something would land in my lap that validated what it was that I was feeling. It never happened the other way around. I never got an idea first. And nobody was talking about geometry while I was going through this process. So now people have it on their t-shirts. It's in, you know, all of the festivals that we go to. How many people are familiar with sacred geometry? Right. So it's around now, but 10 years ago, I know it wasn't, because I was having like a breakdown trying to figure out what I was seeing in the body, having no concept of math or geometry, right, because it was the last thing I was interested in. And I was walking down Venice Boardwalk, and I was trying to explain to a friend, because it's very straining on the mind when you're continually seeing something and nobody else is validating it. You start to think that you're really the problem, and I'd had a psychotic experience, so I was really wondering if I was just really, really messed up. And plus, geometry does interesting things to your brain too, because it's your brain watching itself watch itself. And so it is the only mathematical science that actually gets the left and the right sides of your brain communicating with each other. It needs both the left and the right, and it's the only mathematical science that will do that. So it is a rewiring in itself. And we're going to see why it kind of communicates on a geometric level with itself. So I was walking along Venice Boardwalk and talking to a friend and trying to explain what it was that I was feeling. And there was this little TV with this artist had, and there were, for the first time I saw these fractal images of geometry. And I went, oh my God, that's it, that's what I'm seeing. And he said, I know what you mean, that's it. So that was great that I had that experience, because I know that 10 years ago, that was the first thing I was seeing in Venice, California, where everybody's all about sacred geometry. So it's, even though it's been around since Egypt, old ancient Egyptian times, and there's a remarkable history that I'd love to go into today that I don't have time to go into. It's really bringing up a whole resurgence, and it is everywhere. And it turned out to be the very thing that I was searching for in piecing together the Western and the Eastern concepts of the body that we'll go into. And yeah, I could keep talking and I'm going to stop. So yeah, when we use different words like enlightenment or full Kundalini awakenings, you know, there's this aspect that we don't necessarily know exactly what we're talking about. And Adam Bauer, actually, this is where I'm going to use his quote. He used a quote the other day in his talk about Tantra, and because this is a conference in and about that, I wanted to use this as sort of the base of idea. This is a translation and a definition that states that there is a twofold goal of all tantric practice, the higher and the lower goal. The first refers to a state of spiritual freedom, release from all suffering, salvation or beatitude, the nature of which we will discuss in more depth. This state is usually called moksha or mukti in Sanskrit, both of which means release or liberation. The second refers to the goal of worldly enjoyment and prosperity, which encompasses pleasure, power, and all good things of the tangible world. It is usually called siddhi or bhukti. The fact that the Tantra is legitimately directed at both of these goals is one thing that sets it apart from other Indian religious traditions, or indeed most religions in the world. Though it is true that there are tantric texts devoted almost exclusively to either the goal of mukti or bhukti, in general, tantric spiritual technology was designed to secure both goals, the physical and the otherworldly, the here and the veil, across the veil, wherever we came from and wherever we're going back to. Note carefully here that the definition tells us we cannot call any practice tantric that is only directed toward the lower goal. For example, if the goal of a practice is simply to improve one's sex life, then however spiritual sounding it may be, it cannot be called tantra. If, on the other hand, that goal is part of a practice in which it is consistently subordinated to the goal of complete spiritual freedom and awakening to the ultimate reality, then it can be called tantra. And I think that that is a really important point, because when we use these words like enlightenment, when we use these words like Kundalini, or even geometry we call sacred because we're trying to talk about something that isn't just the geometry that we learned in math class. There's this here world that in physics we know, out of all the energy available in the cosmos, this physical reality is 0.0000001% of all of the energy, and the 99.999999% is vacuum, some of which is quantifiable and much of which is not in physics. So this world of reality is minuscule. It's like a bleed from the vacuum. however we bleed into it and however we bleed out of it. So when we use these words like enlightenment, I just wanted to kind of clarify, or Tantra, that there is a higher and a lower. And I love that that quote says that. There is a way to honor what is going on here and honor what is going on there. And sometimes I think we need to use different words, or at least have an understanding that if somebody is going to use words like, I am a fully enlightened master, that there are different gradations of what we're talking about. Or the word shaman, right? Everyone's a shaman. And I have a lot of friends who are shamans, and I don't mean to criticize that at all, but it's a word that we've appropriated, because shamans are beings who would go over into that 99.99999% and go into the blueprint of life and bring back information. That's a very powerful state, and the mystery is vast. And I think if I took anything from my experience, it was just how vast it is and how incredibly small I am. And while that sounds like I have a lot of humility, I don't. I also have a huge ego and a lot of arrogance about words and attitudes. But I just wanted to be able to kind of discuss this idea of what I'm going to call the event horizon, which is a big idea in physics. That the event horizon, there's a here, and then there's a crossing point, and then there is the all of there. So when we're talking about Kundalini, like if I'm in a yoga class and I hear often things like, if you feel a little wave go up your spine, don't worry, that's just Kundalini. And I'm thinking, that's not my file for Kundalini. My file for Kundalini is like, thank God I'm even here, and why am I here, and what the hell's going on anyway? But at the same time, it's not entirely wrong, and this is why. So we have these concepts, prana and chi. Prana is a Hindi concept, and chi is a Chinese concept. And so Kundalini has its counterpart in Chinese medicine called Jing. And its discussion is the idea of this incredibly vast amount of energy that's in the universe, which is unquantifiable, that we are a bleed of. We could not be able to embody all of that energy, because what would happen if we did? We would explode, right? Like there's no way that this current, right, this beautiful nervous system that is talking about itself right now, has the ability to run that level of current through the body to actually maintain life as we know it. So somewhere there's this amazing little dropper, and that little dropper puts in just enough for us to be able to run these temples as beautifully as we run them, but not enough to actually like create whole worlds. There's a lot of stuff we can create, and we've messed up a lot of stuff by the level of creation that we already have power over. So we don't actually get enough to like create whole universes, and like who's got the dropper, right? That's sort of a really interesting concept. But Kundalini is, and in Chinese medicine, the kidney system is what's actually the organ system that's responsible for taking this cosmic drop of Jing or Kundalini, depending on which culture you want to be discussing it from, and kind of meeting it through the system and breaking it down so that we have something that is more assimilable by the body, called chi or prana, depending on if you're talking from a Hindi perspective or from a Chinese perspective. So chi or prana is recyclable. We can build it up, we can build it down, we can waste it, we can do whatever it is we want. It depends on our lifestyle choices. You know, how much do you do all of the things that are good for you? How much do you do all the things bad for you? And of course, the ancient arts have always taught that sexual energy is a very important part of that process. And of course, we all know that in the tantric and the neo-tantric practices that we work with today, the idea is to actually take that sexual energy, build it up through the body in order to be able to really replenish that chi or prana. Jing or Kundalini cannot be renewed. It is the cosmic drop. And the Buddhists say, you're given so many breaths when you're born, so breathe slowly, which I think is a great way to describe it. Another way I describe it is it's like you're being given a bottle of wine at birth, and you could be given Chateauneuf de Pape, or you could be given a bottle of Planck, and you don't really know which it is, and that's what we would call genetics. And you can share it with all your friends really liberally, or you can sip it really, really slowly, but once that bottle of wine has been drunk, the whole thing's gone, and it's game over, and that's your expiration date. So there's a difference between Jing and Chi, and Kundalini and Prana. And I just wanted to kind of make that clarification. Kundalini is like the battery pack in a body. So when we have a radio and we flick on the radio and you've got the voice coming out and you've got the red light on, that red light and that voice are not the batteries, right? But they can't run without the batteries. So it's not incorrect to say if you feel a little wave up your spine, that's just some Kundalini, because the whole reason that we're here is that Kundalini is running the nervous systems that are here listening to my nervous system talk about itself. You can hear where I went a bit crazy. So the first thing that I began to see was that sense and see were the meridians that I was studying. I began to feel very distinctly in my body. And it was a very long process of personal sensory experience and then working with a lot of clients and seeing things light up on their bodies. And so first I began to really track the meridian system through my body. And then I began to see that they were actually running into like 3 vertical lines in my body. And I didn't know what that meant because I hadn't heard anything of it. But it turns out, and who's read Gopi Krishna, Living with Kundalini? One. It's a great book. It's Gopi Krishna died in the 80s, and he was a pundit in India, and he actually begged people in science to use his body as exploration to what the Kundalini process is. And nobody was listening from a scientific point of view, and he died in the mid-'80s, and he was a prolific writer and wrote a great deal about direct experience with it. And I read that book like 3 times and synopsized the whole thing in like 13 pages, because that's the kind of freak I am and the things I do on a Friday night. Living with Kundalini by Gopi Krishna. So he makes mention of there being 3 vertical lines in the body. But that's all he really says about it. He actually says he doesn't see chakras in the body, and that's an interesting thing that we're going to kind of get into later. But these 3 vertical lines, and it turns out that in every culture, this is understood. So what you would most be familiar with would be the Ida Pingala and Sushumna of the Nadi and the Ayurvedic Nadi system. Who's familiar with that? Right, so that's what we're most familiar with. And so the Nadis are an ancient Indian system. There's anywhere between 16,000 and 300,000 Nadis, which are kind of like meridians, in your body, depending on what you're reading and I guess what level they're reading at or discussing. And there are 3 primary ones, and they're called Ida, which runs on the left, Pingala, which runs on the right, and Sushumna, which runs up the middle. And also in Chinese medicine, kidney yin and kidney yang relate to the exact same thing. Kidney yang runs up the right side of the body, kidney yin runs up the left side of the body. And so as I was saying before, this little cosmic drop we're given is sent into the kidney system. Right in the Ming Men is a point like around L2 in the lower back, which because I'm speaking with a sexuality crowd, I will say that in bodies, a lot of times, this is kind of where if there was a hose that the cosmic dropper went into, this would be the hose. And it feeds the entire kidney system, which is responsible for sex, birth, sexual maturation, and death. It's like we consider sex in this culture to be about our genitals. It's obviously a cellular event that's happening, life source energy moving all the time. And it's the kidney system that is holding that and connected in and around the lower body, the reproductive organs, the womb, the prostate, all of that. So touching that spot can be very erotic because it's what really can create a lot of wave through the body. So this kidney system on kidney yin and kidney yang is discussing the same thing as the Ida Pingala and Sushumna. And as well in the Vedas, there's Agni and Soma. It goes on and on. I found a lot of references and now understand that these 3 vertical lines of energy are understood in all of the other cultures. So they represent on the right side the very yang, masculine, fire, sun, active, positive elements. And on the other side, the very yin, feminine, water, quiescent, and symbolized by the moon. So we've got this moon and sun energy. And what the ancients were always discussing was the idea of energy. So when we're looking medically at things that we're talking about, our very young Western medical science of 200 years doesn't acknowledge that energy exists in the body. So it considers all of these ancient systems to be very primitive. But in fact, what they were looking at was the blueprint of what was actually creating with the electrical conduction and the polarity charge of positive and negative in the body. And so now our physics and our metaphysics are actually meeting more in the middle. And so it's a very exciting time to be alive because this is really beginning to coalesce. And I think a lot of us are getting the same memo. So I just want to skip through a lot because I'm going to keep talking forever otherwise. So basically, what we're looking at is in Western physiology, we have muscles, nerves, and dermatomes. Dermatomes are the way you feel on your skin. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this, but to say that in the Eastern energy systems, we have meridians, chakras, Kundalini, Taoist belts of tension, Dantians, Ayurvedic nadis. We have the work and understanding of Wilhelm Reich. How many people know Wilhelm Reich? Great. And essentially what my work is involved in is that what I trace through the body is that rather than looking at all of these pieces as separate cards on a table in a linear fashion, which is how we're taught to think, I essentially put one card on top of another, or the body showed me how to put one card on top of the other. And they all fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. And it looks like planes of energy moving through, to make a longer story short. So the basis of the work that I do is I go through a huge amount of theory around this, which I'm not going to go around in today. I do have a film online that is an hour long, and I really suck at closing and letting you know about things, so I'm going to just tell you now. I have some cards here, and I actually made them specifically so that you have this image that we're going to go through, so you can stick it on your fridge and you kind of play with the sensory idea of it. They're also in the bookstore, and I have some things there for sale, and as well, I'm going to be putting out a sheet. It's an online film that I created, and I usually sell it as a student tutorial. And I charge usually like $125 for it because it's something, I know everyone like makes a movie and gives it away now, but it took me 17 years to make that hour, so I'm not quite willing to give it away yet. But I am actually being asked to create certain educational platforms, and I'm going to be taking that film and cutting it up and making it into much more extensive programs. And I really like the condensed version of 1 hour to really walk you through how these systems come together and how the geometry is formed in the body. So if you're interested in that, you can, I'm offering it at half price because it's about to come down. So if you're interested, you can go check that out in the bookstore. And please at least take one of the cards, either from me or in the bookstore, because the discussion we're going to have today will give you some stuff to work with in and around that. My film is called what did I call it? The Anatomy of Neural Resonance Therapy. Thanks. And my website is templebody.com for anybody who, I have actually a lot of free information on there, free educational videos, and this year there's a whole new level of platforming coming out. So if you're interested, you can sign up, be on my database, find out about things like that. So essentially, if I had to find a pictorial way of describing what I see in the body as the nervous system and these planes of energy I'm talking about, is that rather than considering, when we talk about being a light body, which the East Coaster in me would be like, yeah, and the West Coaster would be, stop being so uptight about it. But I found the light body in the body. So imagine for a moment that this brain and this spine and this nervous system is what's emitting the energy, right? It is what's being emitted. And so when I look at a body, this is the best pictorial description I can explain of what it is that I see. And it also helps explain, because I know acupuncture, it explains to me why there are certain points on the body that acupuncture points exist. Because if you have energy that we'll call light, although Russian scientists have discovered that it's actually probably more sound resonance that the nervous system is functioning on. Because if the nervous system were electrical, it would be emitting heat, and it does not. And so whatever this, we'll call it light, whatever this light by this energy from the middle is coming out. And just like sunlight coming out of a burst, where the physical body, which is just a film, where it passes through, it leaves traces. And the ancients began to trace on the body what they were seeing. And so this very deep science of understanding one point to another point all of a sudden comes into a much bigger perspective. We're certainly not taught this at acupuncture school. So this is something that the body taught me, and it just makes a lot of sense. And in all the theory and stuff involved, it actually makes even more sense. And the more you get into acupuncture theory, it makes even more sense, and it's all very cool, and I'm kind of obsessed. What else do I want to say about that? Oh yeah, so like in acupuncture school, we're taught, this point is really good for mastitis, if your breast hurts, and it's really good for nosebleeds. We don't know why. We're just told those are the indications, contraindications, remember them, regurgitate them, here's your diploma. Right? So So there's just a lot involved in that whole thing. And so this is the idea of this nervous system talking about itself, is this embodiment of light. And somewhere in the here world, I have a consciousness that's talking about this energy like it's an it. And in the there world, on the other side of the veil, it's the one operating everything, feeling my consciousness talking about itself. Right? So you'd think also, too, 3 vertical lines. I'm going to whip through this part really quickly. It's all in the film in a lot of detail. Medieval philosophers believed that the spinal column was actually going to be 3 full columns through the body. And you can see that actually in our nervous systems, there are indeed already 3 lines moving through this white on each side of the spine. These are the meridians, actually, the bladder meridian down the back, which is actually running all the kidney chi. This is where I can start getting carried away talking too much, so I'm going to keep going. But you can see really clearly here, there already are 3 vertical lines of neural tissue in the body. And it's not a huge leap to imagine that as we evolve, that they might become as thick as the spine itself, the spinal cord. And so these are called sympathetic ganglion that run down. That's your sympathetic nervous system, you know, your whole fight and flight thing. This is the one that keeps you in fight and flight. And so there's like these little football huddles down the side that are really significant to the overall fractal idea of the body. Might not get a lot of time to go into that, but just wanted to at least be able to show you the 3 vertical lines that we're seeing. And then in these old ancient documents, you can't really see very clearly in this photo. I don't know why they didn't come out in this PowerPoint, but there's the sun on one side and the moon on the other side. And there's 2 guys fighting, and there's Mercury standing in the middle with the caduceus of the life wave going through the body. And then the rod of Asclepius is over here on the sun power side. And they're in combat to have the stillness in the center of what's going on. I mean, there's no better way to describe concepts across cultures and languages and wars and library burnings than symbol. And the sun and the moon has always, since the ancient Egyptian times, been the symbol of heaven and earth, of masculine and feminine, and of the polarities of the body running the temples we live in and the universe itself. So the wisdom is much, much deeper than the superficial one that we're taught generally about the body in Western medicine. Although, you know, I've got doctors in the family and stuff, and I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for Western medicine, and many of us wouldn't be. So it's certainly not a diss to Western medicine at all. We're just all learning. The event horizon is a concept in physics that discusses the here being the physical and the small bit, and the there being the large bit, across the veil, wherever we came from, wherever we're going to. But what does it actually mean in physics? And what it means in physics is that if we have the ability from a technological perspective to actually understand the mechanism of bleed between over there and over here, we have the ability to have an absolutely inexhaustible source of energy. And that's an absolute species changer, right? Because no longer do we have to pull fossil fuels from the earth. We have the ability to actually draw energy in, and that's really the future of where our science is going. It's not sci-fi, and it's not woo-woo, and there's a lot involved in that whole topic that's going on. What it means in the human body, and what I have learned from working with the understanding of what I'll call the geometry of the body, is that it gives us a deeper map work to the idea of how to draw in that extra chi, how to draw in energy. There are certain physical issues that I had that Western medicine couldn't help me with, and that left me very sick and on a lot of antibiotics for many years. And I have done a lot of healing on my body. I continue to in whatever way is coming up, because I'm in no way enlightened or fully awakened or perfect or anything. But I have definitely healed myself of things that were unhealable. And my brother's an MD, and he's been witness to it my whole life. And so I've gotten this also medical perspective of what's been going on. We have the ability to cross the event horizon in our own body. And certainly using our sexual energy is one doorway into that. And before I forget to mention it, one thing that the body has taught me and is teaching me is that the event horizon there, when we're talking about orgasm and sexuality, and I don't know if this is common tantric knowledge or if this is just something that I'm learning in the body. But where the event horizon happens is that when we get ourselves up to orgastic point, right? Because there's the here side, the before part, and then the after part, right? And it's just electrical charge. It's the body building up charge, releasing charge, and going down. And at the point of the apex of orgasm If we could hold that middle ground before it goes over the threshold, it's like trying to hold two north poles of a magnet together. It's a very tricky art. And yet if we can actually maintain that, that's where the event horizon happens and everything can get pulled in. So it's not just about the build-up and it's not just about the after part. It's actually all the magic is in the sweet spot in the middle. And so physics is also looking at where that sweet spot is in relation to drawing energy over. Also, the event horizon between the consciousness and the subconsciousness, to me, is the description of what healing is. My version of healing is that my subconscious knows a lot more than my consciousness does. And every bit of healing that happens to me on all three levels of mind, body, spirit, because they all happen simultaneously. You can't have one without the other. The chemistry is not going to change without the brain changing, et cetera, and without there being physical response and healing. That healing is actually when the subconscious bleeds a little bit more into the consciousness. And suddenly we have a little bit more awakening, and that changes the whole chemistry and nature of what's going on in the body. That's my version of healing. So I don't consider myself a healer. That's a word that I use for my grandfather. And you know, I think it's a perfectly fine word to use. I just consider myself to be more of a facilitator in healing, which I hear more and more people saying, and I think that's really our tribe, because we're all healers. And we're all doing the healing, and I'm really only in this work because I'm working on myself, and I'm doing the healing that I can do. Okay, so what's sacred geometry and why does it matter? This is a water molecule, and if we were all fish and I swam up to you and I said, this is water, that's what it would look like. And you'd be like, because all molecular structure is geometric in nature. And so you'd be like, well, that's really cool, but what does that have to do with me? You know, but so imagine the leap of a fish brain to go from this to the water that it's swimming in and the water that its body is. That's a massive mental leap. And as a species, I believe that's exactly the point that we're at. So we are learning about this field that we're swimming in, and we're learning about what we're made of. So it's very significant because then we're actually talking about field. And I love the history of all the people like Mesmer and all the people who were exiled for talking about field or etheric matter in the body and different things. And so we're still working on it. But you can see it everywhere in nature. It exists everywhere, this geometric patterning in one form or another. And so geometry, like I love this one. This is just like an acid trip, and you can eat it for dinner. And I know, right? Such a trip. So it's everywhere around, and there's this beautiful, you know, when you get down the rabbit hole of geometry and what happens is this fascinating world. Like I all of a sudden found myself in the middle of it. And the only clue I ever had was for like 15 years, I had this dream all the time that I was trying to find my math class and I could never find it. And then as soon as the day that I went click, 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 and I went, whoa, and I saw that the dream stopped, and I thought that was amazing. So geometry is the nervous system talking to itself. So yeah, beautiful, beautiful geometries that are seen everywhere in the physical form. This is really beautiful. This is by John Martineau, who's an amazing geometer in the UK. And he has a book called A Little Book of Coincidence, which I love. And it's because this is the kiss of Venus. This is how Venus moves around the Earth every 8 years. And you can see these geometric formations happening. You can see that it's spiral. And you can also see that if you connect all of the spirals together, it makes a perfect pentagram. You keep this up like a spirograph, that's what it looks like. That's what we're swimming in. Without going into a lot of detail as to why, the 3 vertical lines led and horizontal lines led to a geometry that I began to see in the body, and this is what it looks like, and that's what's on the cards. I think the most important thing that I could share about this whole idea is the vertical lines. So we don't just have a central channel, we have a channel that runs down the right side and a channel that runs down the left side. Best way for you to be able to understand that is even like, if you have, let's say, like we were talking about a tooth issue yesterday. If you have a tooth issue over here, very commonly the tooth molars back here and up here are relating to 2 particular planes. When clients come to me and they have a tooth issue, I immediately start looking at what line we're talking about. Because the right side is governed by the liver and the gallbladder, and the left side is governed by stomach and heart. So there are different ways to discuss this. Meridians are like tarot cards, and so I have to try to put it as briefly as possible. which takes away some of the magic. But the left side basically is what is digestible to you, what is indigestible to you, and how you are assimilating your environment is how things are going to be working in your physical digestive system. And a lot of that shows up on the left side, and that's where we pack all of our anxiety in. So we eat emotionally as a result. We have, if you get in shock, you don't want to eat. Or you do want to eat because you're trying to fill a hole. So there's this whole way that's the actual way of the left side working. So a lot of stomach issues, digestive issues, different things. As soon as there's a left-sided thing going on, those are the things that I'm looking at first. On the right side, it's there's so much to say about the liver and the gallbladder and the emotional charge of different things that it's carrying, as well as the environmental factors involved, because it's what's, of course, detoxifying everything in our system. So different kinds of things, like why are ears an erogenous zone? My perspective of that is not only is the ear itself a map of the body, as is every other part of the body, which is the fractal side of it, but also the deep, deep, deep inner ear goes right behind your eye where that whole vertical line is. And in Kundalini writings, I've read things where somebody would say, I got this incredible pressure behind my eye, but it felt sexual. And it's because we're hitting the tree. Sexuality is a cellular event. And the here and the reality, the bhukti part of it, we consider it to just be a very genital event and a rush up the spine event. And I encourage you to look at these 3 vertical lines from the perspective that if there was a whirlpool going down and you had to draw it 2D, it would look like 3 vertical lines. You can't have the middle path without having a left and a right side. And what we are is a funnel of energy going up and going down. The other slide that we couldn't see clearly, and which you see in many drawings, is one spiral going down and one spiral coming up this way, because the body is always moving clockwise, counterclockwise, with the energy coming up and down and around. So what's valuable about where these intersection points are, that I call them here, is that you can actually watch pleasure and pain move through your body from these centers, but you don't necessarily notice. Right? Like, let's say you've got, like right now I've got kind of a neck thing going on right in here. And so I have like a point up in here. Even though this structure is from creative center to creative center, it's very fractal and moves out. And I'll explain fractals in a moment. But the whole body obviously is connected. So let's say there's a point in here and I'm feeling something here. But then maybe in 10 minutes, I feel that sort of nagging pain that you can get in the middle of your shoulder blade. And I'm not connecting it to my neck. I'm just thinking, oh yeah, sometimes that comes up and it bugs me. And then maybe later on in the day that goes away and I've got that lower back thing going on, or maybe some menstruals or hormonal stuff or whatever. And then maybe it'll move down my leg later on, different sorts of things like that, but we don't connect the dots. And so this is actually an entire system that is like a hydraulic system of energy looking for balance and release through the body. And you can track pleasure and pain through your body in this way. I love the fact, I was just teaching in Australia, and there was one gentleman, he's an author, and had come to some workshops of mine and had come for a number of sessions and different things. And he wrote to me recently and he said he's been working with this idea with his partner in lovemaking. And he said, I can't believe how much opens in the body when you're really relating to all of these different points, because this is where energy will block. They're intersection points like traffic. So when I'm teaching people in workshops, I'm teaching them, it doesn't matter how you work. I don't work with people's genitals, but a lot of people in the Tantra field do. And so when you're doing pelvic work or something like that, or massage or acupuncture, there's going to be certain areas where the body is about to, it will block energy. And if you know where they are and how to link them up, it helps the body release more so that you're getting more flow. So it's not a new therapy. It's just a way of amplifying whatever we do by understanding a kind of subtle anatomy of the body and the logic of how the West and the East actually weave together, because it's logical. So this guy was saying that he wrote to me and he said, thank you for new pathways to ecstasy. I had no idea. So this seems to be working for other people too. Certainly with clients or with students, the main thing I hear is you help me work to core. It's a whole difference, because we are going into core, in. It's never on the body. It's what center in are you doing? And it creates a whole response through the body. And he's so affected by it that he actually wants to write a book with me about it, which I think is really great. So specifically in what this means in sensuality. And I've always been all like somatic and practical and stuff. So it's a really fun project that we're working on. Now, if you viewed this from 2D, right, because this was if I had to draw the tornado or the whirlpool in 2D, but it's not a 2D idea. It's actually a very 3D structure. And if it were 2D, there would just be a straight line across the middle of the head. But in fact, there are particular primary planes in the body that move out from this thing. And when I kind of drew them out and really looked at them, and this is in relation to the meridian system and to all of these other systems, I was just putting together, connecting the dots without knowing or looking for anything. And so it creates a triangle because you have to be able to see depth in the body. And of course, because it's valid one way, it's equally valid in another way. And suddenly I had this ancient symbol that I was looking at, which set me on that path where I can start to get much more esoteric as things went along. And which is, of course, everywhere, the same fire, water, different things. So I was seeing all these links being made between not only systems, but the ancient past and the current world and medicine and what have you. And the idea of light and refraction. So that's been my journey largely. And this is how we see light, this little thin sliver in a sea of unseeables. So let's just take a look and break down at this idea of light moving through. If energy is coming from the middle of the body and not onto the body, then I'm using the chakra system as a general idea of one singularity, because this is happening on a cellular level, on a quark level, on the tiniest Planck length level, all the way out to the universe. And so we're just using one singularity or one point as an example. Here's a ray of light moving through, right? Because it doesn't just stop at the body, because the body is just a veil between the here and there. That's another angulation of it. That's another angulation of it. You put it through. So, and if you kept going, it would just be a great big white blob in the middle of the screen, right? So how does the brain break down what it's looking at? And how does the body and all of these things work in spirals and lines? And that's the exploration. Keep it going through all the chakra system, and it looks like that. So when I look at the meridian system, it looks to me like cheat notes from 5,000 years ago of, you know, what people needed to study to do basics, not to mention all the burnings that have happened and a lot of information that's been lost. So we're looking at it like this is the meridian system. It's been around since here and there and thousands of years ago. The meridian system we have now was created in like 1492 from a compilation of things we don't even know. So we're still very much in the exploration of what all these systems mean and what it means to our own health and healing. And basically what it means is that our own practices allow us to be able to cross the event horizon and that we heal ourselves. My line on my website is, if you have a body, you are the best healer that you know. And I think that that's the exploration. Who knows what a fractal is? Awesome. Okay. Who knew what a fractal was 5 years ago? 10 years ago? Wow. Okay. So a few. I didn't know what a fractal was till I saw it in the body, and I got the whole concept of like things moving out. And then the next day, an article fell into my lap and explained fractals to me. And now I'm all about fractals, and fractal anatomy is the title of my book that I'm writing, Fractal Anatomy and the Geometry of Healing. So it was discovered by Benoit Mandelbrot. And basically, what do I have next here? Another really cool animation. You can't see. But we'll leave it up because it's pretty. So fractals mean different things. Fractals basically, Benoit Mandelbrot, this is a mathematical concept. This is math creating shape. And if you keep zooming into it, it keeps creating the same shape. Fractals explain how mountain ranges work, they began to notice. But this is a highly sophisticated, cutting-edge mathematical truth. And numbers make shape and make form. Cell phones work because you have antennas in there that are in fractal form. Otherwise, you'd have all of these little things hanging off your cell phone. And that wouldn't work. And in fact, there's a great YouTube clip on it. This guy who's this I guess he's a physicist or something. Anyway, he was like young, and he was doing something with electrical things that his landlord didn't want, you know, one of those discs. I'm so stupid about everything. Like, anyway, he needed to have a lot of antenna. And his landlord was not pleased about it. So he figured out fractal, decided the idea of using Benoit Mandelbrot's idea, and made this little kind of the square that goes into the square that goes into the square that goes into the square. And that's how your cell phone works. And in medicine, they are discovering that cancer tumors actually start to create different blood flow in a fractal form. So the way to be able to begin to understand cancer prior to its arrival is actually being able to understand blood flow. And they couldn't understand it because it was so chaotic, but they're understanding now that it's more fractal than anything. So I take that concept of fractal because I see it in bodies in a different way. So for instance, put your leg like this. In the lower part of your leg here is a really sensitive spot called spleen 6 in acupuncture, and it's very connected. It's contraindicated in pregnancy, especially in the first trimester, because it can cause miscarriage. But basically, it's always been known that this lower part pertains to the lower part of the body. What the body has since taught me is that the middle part pertains to the middle, and the upper part pertains to the upper. And without getting too complicated, it can also flip around. But for now, let's do upper, middle, lower. So in your calf, you're going to have like most people in one form or another have like a little walnut, I call it, in there. It's really sensitive. If you can't find that one, just work down your calf and you'll find something that hurts. Right? My favorite thing is finding, if there are people like, I can't find it, I'm like, I'll find it. Okay. Exactly. So this is a really good point up in here. When you get that nagging pain between your shoulder blades, try this. Also, because it can flip around, I don't want to get complicated, but really good for lower body in through here as well. Essentially, without even worrying about the intellectual details of it, if you go into your calf and really find those sensitive points, you will start to open up different parts of your body, and you will notice that a pain that you had in your body changes because of what it is that you've opened up in your leg. Because we're fractal, right? That might seem odd, but how can the ear be a mirror of the whole body, or the hand be a mirror of the whole body, or the foot be a mirror of the whole body, and not have every part of the body be a mirror of the whole part of the body? Because we're fractal and holographic in nature. So really working down, this is one of my favorite things to do. And when I'm working with clients, a lot of the times they're chatting, talking, we're kind of soaking into some, getting down to business. And I'll start working down their calves, and it's already giving me a read of what I'm going to find in their torso. I'm already getting a read of like the left and the right, what's going on, what organ system might not be working in relation to their symptoms, in relation to what they're looking like, in relation to what they're saying. And the calves giving me a total read of the torso. So my best way to describe this is like if there was a house and there was a big truck outside with lots of boxes in it, and it wants to bring all the boxes into the house. If you just kept filling up the foyer, it would shut down the house pretty quickly and there'd be no in and out. So the logical thing is that the whole family comes together and they grab all the boxes and they pack them in the den and the kitchen and the little kids' rooms and all the different things so that more boxes can come through. Eventually, so many boxes come through that the whole house is filled up, and there's your expiration date again, because there's no more movement in there. These parts are like the little kids' rooms. It's areas to pack things away in order to keep an overall balance of the body. And it's also there because the whole body is fractal like a mirror in everything. So you would be able to read the whole body from your finger if you could do that. I'm convinced we could map the orgasm out and understand so much about the body. If we could all actually really compare and understand how we all relate to our sexual energy, we could find maps of attitudes and health and ways of being in that. We could map out the diaphragm, could map out all of these different parts. So fractals mean a bunch of different things. They basically are what does he say? Yeah, that's not the phrase I like. It's the same pattern that's repeated at different scales. Okay, so here's the same pattern repeated at different scales all throughout the body. I'm writing a book on tattoos because so many people are getting them now, and I began to notice when I worked on people that what they had and where said a lot about it's like a diagnostic. It gave me another indication. Upper, middle, lower is upper, middle, lower. What you wear here is like what you wear on your sleeve. It's closest to your heart. What you wear here is what you'll fight for. What you wear, sometimes you have like a tattoo around here, and it's like lung issues. Another tattoo there, lung issue, lung issue. All of a sudden, I've got a whole diagnostic of what's going on. So what's going on with your lungs? You know, they're like, how would you know? So the body can be read in that way. And fractals are also based on the idea of how things run in nature. So, for instance, plants breathe, by having little stroma on the bottom. They're like little diaphragms. And they open up and they allow oxygen in, or no, carbon dioxide in, and then they exhale and they let oxygen out, right? So we breathe a mirror form of plant life, and that's how we get to keep breathing, because they keep giving. And when they go to sleep at night, there's more carbon dioxide in the air because they're not breathing in. They're going to sleep. And then during the day, they're back into activity. So this carbon dioxide level to oxygen level changes on a 24-hour level, which is the same fractal idea of how we breathe.
Hi.
Hi.
I don't know if you can, this is on.
Mm-hmm.
So I had an experience, I've had it twice, and I haven't been able to understand what it is. And a couple of things you said gave me some idea that you might be able to explain it. Or not.
Or not, but at least we're sharing stories, which
Exactly.
is good.
So in a sexual experience where I was raising my energy was raising, I got to this point in the experience where I felt and I saw this kind of boundary line, and I felt, as I approached it, a lot of fear, and I felt like if I went over, I wasn't going to come back.
It's quite possible. In my experience, it seems quite possible.
Yeah. So I've just been really curious about what that is, and you said something about the event horizon.
Yeah, and so I use that term kind of as a metaphor for this passing over point, or like as the book was saying, the bhukti and the mukti. You know, there's the here and there's the there. There is the veil, and I know that no matter what happens when you cross that event horizon and come back or whatever it is, especially in a sexual experience, I think the ego gets very frightened because there's a huge surging of energy that comes back up through the nervous system, and part of you does die. Part of me absolutely died in that, and the part that didn't think any of this could happen is alive, you know, or died and is alive to something else. And so I think it is scary, and no matter if we go over or come back or not. And the ultimate practice that we make every day is how brave are we in the face of that event horizon come the time that we're not coming back. And I think that that's the ultimate practice of being here. Yeah, thank you.
So I have a really quick question. I've heard in these, sexuality things that there's this Kundalini experience that you can have, might have, whatever. And I've heard a little bit about what happened to you, and this is really awesome. And I'm sitting here going, is this something that could happen to me?
That's a great question.
How does it happen, or
it's
how
a
does
really
it apply
good
to
question.
us?
Yeah, because I think that, as I was saying, a lot of people are having more out-of-the-box experiences. But if we talk about Kundalini as like just a little wave up the spine, or something that it's something that it does to us. I didn't do anything to bring it on. I wasn't, I certainly am not a practicing yogi that's practicing 10 hours a day for lifetimes. And, all the ancient practices, the yogis would do this in order to activate and build up Kundalini. And in this society, we have this perspective that it's something that if you bounce up on your coccyx enough, you can like somehow hit enlightenment between breakfast and lunch. And it's just, I don't go for that, and so there's this sense we're talking about it in the here world. But it's across the veil, and it is a mystical experience. And my experience was like the fear of God. I understood what the fear of God meant. And I'm not religious in that way, but I was like, I get it. Like, it was so big, and I didn't ask for it to happen. And we are, so yes, absolutely it could happen to you. And absolutely it could happen to me again. I had a second experience that was similar but much shorter, and I saw how much I had learned to be able to deal with it. But you know what, if it happened again like that, I'd be scared shitless because it was really hard, and I can't even believe I made it through what I did. That being said, a lot of people just have blissful, beautiful experiences. I think that the only reason maybe mine was so intense was because I wouldn't have done this work without it. I wouldn't have left the lives that I needed to leave in order to do this work. And so this healing journey has been helpful. So I think we talk about how we can activate it and how we can bring it up, but ultimately it's Great Spirit's choice.
Meredith, I want to make a comment. Actually, my mom was in a relationship with a man in the 70s who wrote a book called The Kundalini or Psychosis. And his name is Lisa Nella. I think it's still published.
Yeah.
And he was a psychiatrist at that time.
And I've been looking for that book because I had it and I lost it, and I was trying to remember what it was called.
I think you can find it if you go to used books on Amazon. You can probably find it.
Great.
But and I just want to say that because I had a spontaneous Kundalini experience back in the 80s, and I think part of it has to do with you go into the psychosis experience. Part of it can be the intensity, but part of it can also be how willing you are to surrender, the egoic part of you to surrender.
Mm-hmm.
So like what was interesting to me in your story was when you went out and you kind of surrendered a bit, instead of trying to hold on to the control part, is when you felt your heart kind of open, and then you went into the bliss. So some of us are more prone to surrender into that than others.
Mm-hmm.
So my experience was not that. I went into the oneness, and I was making love with somebody, and I was sure they were there with me, and they, experienced the whole thing. And I'm getting a little emotional. And then when
it's an emotional experience.
and I came back, and I was like, wow, that was amazing. He goes, yeah, that was pretty good. And I was like, no, I'm talking about the Kundalini thing. Like I energy shot out my head, and I left my body, and I merged with the universe. And he's like, what? I was like, really? You missed that?
Yeah.
And
no,
so,
thank you. That's valid. Yeah.
But I also think there's Stan Grof's wife wrote a book about it as well.
Yeah,
which
I
is
love Christina Groff.
and I forget what her book's called.
Spiritual Emergence.
Spiritual
That
Emergency.
book helped me a lot at the time too.
Yeah.
And
So
it's
I think
a shame that center doesn't exist anymore.
So I think one of the things that your talk brought up for me at the beginning was that I think when people hear these stories, it brings up fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what it is that what I want to say about that is if something like that happens to you, you don't want to necessarily go to a medical doctor who has no clue about what that is, who's going to say you're having a psychotic experience, or you need some antidepressants or anti-anxiety or whatever. You need to go to somebody who's an expert in Kundalini awakening.
And I would just want to say too that while that's very true, being an expert in I think that's you can't be an expert in God, but I think you can be very good at, I know that I'm sure your work and understanding of it has definitely helped people, and the conversations help. And it's true, we shouldn't be afraid of it. And I also want to give it a bit of a nod to the fact that we are also treating it often like this thing that you can get between breakfast and lunch. We're taking it a little bit too lightly at the same time. And
I'm not minimizing it, but I also want to say that I think there is something like a tap. Like you can imagine if you have the tap on very light, just barely turned on, this little tiny stream of Kundalini can come in, and you can have a small experience.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you turn on a fire hose, it can kick your ass across the universe.
Yeah.
And so it's like that as well.
Yeah, for sure.
But when I say expert, I agree. There's not really expert, but someone who's experienced.
That's a great word for it.
So someone who's experienced, who's had that experience.
Yeah, thank you.
Run around.
Thank you for your lecture. It was very interesting. I had a question. I had a severe illness at one point in my life, and just naturally, I went into inhabiting this event horizon that you call, which I really like that title. I really connect with that, where I spent about a year living in that horizon, and kind of healing myself while I was undergoing regular Western medical treatment at the same time. And what I find is that it created interesting pathways that sometimes lead me to checking out in my reality since then, and it's been over 20 years now. So I'm wondering, what do you do to deal with these new pathways that are very interesting and fantastic in terms of healing and connecting with that vacuum, but maybe lead to a lack of grounding in the here and now?
I would kind of go with Crystal Dawn's idea of go for the surrender. And to try to, when the fear comes up because you don't know what to do or what's happening, that's to me where we build faith. Because I don't have the answer for your question or your experience. And that's why I say also we should share stories, because maybe someone does have a direct answer. There are definitely ways to ground ourselves. And I find also when that energy is really active, the last thing I need to do is actually go in deeper and do more meditation and do more stretching, because it's just a little bit too much. So I need to be in nature. I need to ask me, what do I need? So I guess that would be my suggestion, is to like go in that space, ask yourself what you need, ask yourself what's blocking you from achieving that. And the answer might be, I'm afraid. What are you afraid of? I had one experience once when I had a second rush, and I went into like shock and terror, and all of a sudden it's like I turned into two people. And it was not a voice in my head or guidance per se. It was Meredith, the therapist, talking to Meredith, the freaked out person. And the therapist was like, all right, what's the problem here? And I'm like, well, like everything all is one, and it's all just kind of, you know, and I was like, okay, so like, you know that, right? And I was like, uh-huh. And so how do you, how do you feel when, and I'm in like an apartment in Venice, and I've got to drive, and I'm freaked out, and it's like, how do you feel when you push that energy away from you? And I'm like, I feel really bad. And then it was like, okay, so how do you feel if you put that energy inside of you and suspend your belief? You don't know what it means. You don't know if it's possible. This huge concept that you're seeing on a massive global galactic scale may or may not be true. Why don't you suspend your belief, put it inside of you as a possibility? How do you feel now? And I thought, well, I feel calmer. And Meredith, the therapist, said, there's your answer. And so I breathed, I grounded, I went back out, I got into my car, and I, you know, managed to and every time that thing came up, it kept reminding me, inside, suspend belief, inside, suspend belief. So I helped myself by talking to myself about it in that way. And I think you have all of your own answers. Yeah, thank you. Okay, sorry.
A quick question here. Thank you again for your lecture. It's been very
4 minutes, great.
very good. I
Thank
have
you.
a question about reconciling the movement of the energies up the body and through the body with the Tao experience of harnessing the energy here to then work with that energy either for the healing purposes or for manifestation or for bringing it out into the world through action. So it's, you know, it's almost like the practice of qigong when you're harnessing the energy here and creating
Here
a
being
energy
the lower
ball.
dantian. Okay,
Well, lower than the solar plexus. It's
Okay.
around the second
sure.
chakra level.
Yeah.
Versus having it flow up and down. Have you studied that or looked into it or
No, I'm
into
still
those
learning.
practices?
You know, I don't feel like I'm in a position to actually tell people how to manifest or what to do specifically with the energy, save from being able to track it. I feel like my role is to help us get in touch with what's actually going on neurally so we can find our own answers and share that idea. So I think I understand your question, which is how is it moving up as opposed to here, and what's the area to use for manifestation? Is that what you mean? I think generally what I see is like a funnel, this funnel idea, and there's energy moving up and energy moving down, and I can choose to focus it on a particular place. I can choose to have it come up. I see a very toroid shape where it's coming back in and around, whether I'm in meditation, whatever it is that I'm doing, or in actual manifestation work. And my practice is actually sitting in the field, and energy moves through, and it teaches me how to work with it. That's the best that I could say, because again, telling you what to do, I don't think I'm qualified for. Cheers. Thanks. Oh, I forgot to show you. Wait, let me just show one thing. I forgot to show you the coolest thing. The whole point of this was that when I could actually pull the shape out of the body, this is what I found. It's not 2D, it's 3D. You can see the Seal of Solomon. And so when I actually pulled it out of the body, it does this really amazing geometry, and they're actually there's a couple of these that I have for sale in the boutique, in the bookstore. Yeah, Sacred Sex Boutique. And so there's, at least spin it and go take a look at it. And so I thought, like, I was not looking for it, and I thought, well, even if I'm wrong, it certainly looks cool. So, and that set me on my world of geometry and all the stuff that I know about geometry now. So yeah, there's loads to say. There's free stuff on my website and at templebody.com, and thank you so much for your time and being here.